You're visiting the Mom Next Door and our stories of faith. I'm glad you dropped by for a visit. Please stay a while and hear what the Lord has done in the lives of moms just like you and me. Hi, friends. I hope your family is all settled in back to the routine and rhythm after the holidays. For most, it's a really happy time with family and friends, but for some, the holiday is extremely hard and painful. There's so many reasons that the holidays can be tough. But as you get ready to listen today, I want to prepare you for our topic. It's a really hard one, and you might want to find a quiet place to listen alone. It might not be an episode that you play for your little ones. In fact, I'd maybe show some caution in that. Today, I'm joined by Jill Sullivan from While We're Waiting Ministries, and our topic is child loss. I can't imagine anything worse. Jill, you are much more adept at introducing the topic and introducing yourself in that. So would you just go for it? Tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll be talking about your ministry, and just take us into your story.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, for having me on. I've been excited about visiting with you. So, like you said, I'm Jill Sullivan. I live in Hot Springs, Arkansas. I've been married for 35 years to my husband, Brad, and we have two daughters. One is our younger daughter, actually, is Bethany, and she's 27 years old and is a dental hygienist, lives not too far away, so we get to see her fairly often. Our other daughter, our oldest daughter, her name is Hannah, and she went to heaven when she was 17. I'd like to tell you a little bit about her, if you don't mind.
I would love to hear about her.
Yeah, I like to kind of describe her kind of by the things that she loved. It kind of helps you get to know her a little bit. She was a girl who loved school. You know, a lot of kids don't like school very much. Our younger daughter was kind of that way. She went to school for the social aspect and not the academics, but Hannah loved academics. And her dream was to be the valedictorian of her high school class, and she was kind of headed that way. She also loved American Idol. Back years ago when American Idol first began, she was one of the biggest fans. And we kind of even structured our lives around watching American Idol. And she would spend 2 hours after every episode texting her votes in. And, she usually was pretty good at picking the winners. She almost always chose the one who ended up winning the season. So that was another fun thing that she enjoyed. She also loved her family. She was a kid who, when it was her birthday, rather than have a bunch of friends over, she wanted to have her grandparents and her aunts and uncles and all of her family together for her birthday. So she did love her family. And then she also loved the Lord. She came to know Jesus as her Savior when she was about 8 years old. She just always was very involved in our church youth group and went on mission trips and things like that. But she was just pretty much, a normal teenager with those kinds of interests. And on Valentine's Day of 2008, she came out in the morning, it was a school day. She came into the kitchen and she said, "Mom, I've got the worst headache I've ever had." And then she ran to the bathroom. She was sick to her stomach. And, I thought, oh, it's too bad. She's got a bug. It's, some kind of little virus, and it's, Valentine's Day and she's going to have to miss school. But, it's kids get sick. And so we just kind of put her back to bed and let her sleep it off. And when she woke up that afternoon, she was fine. The next morning, the same thing happened again. She woke up with a severe headache, sick to her stomach, and we just were kind of going through, what could this be? What could be causing this? Maybe it's just sinus drainage that that she's experiencing during the night, and it's giving her a headache and making her sick to her stomach. But as the days went on, every day she would get up and have a terrible headache. She did finally kind of push through and go back to school after a few days because, like I said, she loved school and her grades were very important to her. She did not want to miss class. So she kind of pushed herself to go to school. And she called me from school that day and she said, "Mom, my headache is a little bit better, but it's like I have double vision." And, that alarmed me. I knew that that was not normal. So I said, well, let me come and pick you up and we'll just go straight to the doctor and see what's going on. No, no, I want to finish the day. We'll talk about when I get home. So she got home that day and I looked at her. I just really looked at her when she got home and I noticed that her pupils were very, very enlarged. And that did scare me because I knew that was not normal. And so we got her into the doctor the very next morning. And, the doctor didn't really know what to do with her, couldn't figure out what was going on. But because she had these visual things going on, he referred her to an ophthalmologist. Well, the ophthalmologist that we were referred to was actually a kid that we had known in college. We went to Ouachita Baptist University here in Arkansas, and we had known this guy in college. The last we knew, he was studying to be a worship pastor, but he had gone back to school somewhere down the road and he'd become an ophthalmologist, and he was practicing part time in our hometown of Hot Springs. And that's who we were referred to. You know how God just puts these people in your
Mm-hmm.
life?
Mm-hmm.
So we went to see him and he examined her and he said, I really can't tell what's going on with her, but if this were my daughter, I would want her to have an MRI. And so we were referred for an MRI. We were scheduled for the very next morning. And just to kind of make a long story a little bit shorter, the MRI revealed that she had a brain tumor. And the brain tumor was right in the center of her brain. Tommy met us there at the MRI suite and broke the news to Hannah and I together, showed us on the screen exactly what the tumor looked like. Here when you have something like an MRI or a medical test like that, you don't expect to get results immediately.
Mm-mm.
So we knew that it was urgent. He even told us, and he was wonderful. He sat down with us and prayed with us because both Hannah and I started crying at this point. It was just such shocking news. He offered to drive me home. And I said, no, I can drive. And so we got in the car and drove home and then had to break it to my husband and our other daughter that Hannah had a brain tumor. In fact, Hannah got out of the car and she's the one who told her dad. And, it was just one of those moments where everything is just so surreal, so hard to believe that this is our family.
Yeah.
Things like this happen, but you don't expect it to happen in your family.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm thinking, well, it's a brain tumor. We'll have surgery, they'll get it out. And, she might have to have some PT, some OT, some speech therapy. And, we'll get her back to health and everything will be fine. We prayed that night. We just we knew that as much as we loved Hannah, that God loved her even more.
Yeah.
And we placed her in his hands and we said, Lord, we trust you with
Mm-hmm.
this. We don't like it. We don't like this news. We don't know what it means. We don't know where we're going from here, but we trust you with whatever this is. So we had kind of a restless night that night and got up the next morning and drove straight to Children's Hospital. Our doctor, Tommy, had called ahead and they were prepared for us when we got there, and they took us in and began doing some additional tests and things like that. One of the first things they did was another MRI just to confirm what the first one had shown. And they scheduled her for brain surgery within just a couple of days. We spent those days, they started giving her some steroids and that helped her feel a lot better. That
Mm-hmm.
kind of took care of the swelling that was in her brain. And so her headaches went away, the vision problems resolved. And
Mm-hmm.
we just really felt like, okay, we're gonna walk through this. We're trusting God with this. They're gonna do the surgery and everything will be fine. And the surgery happened a couple days later. Everything went very well in the surgery. It's a terrifying thing to send your child in for brain surgery because you just don't know.
Yeah. Any surgery, really, but
Yes,
that one
exactly.
especially. Yeah.
Yes, you just don't know how they're going to come out. But God was good, and she came out very well. She actually had no complications at all, no neurological damage at all from them going in and resecting that tumor. She had a couple of visual things, but not anything that she couldn't live with. And we were home after having brain surgery within just 5 or 6 days.
Wow.
But we knew that we would have to return and get the biopsy results. We knew that they were going to take that tumor out, send it off for a biopsy, and we had to come back and find out what that was. And so we returned to the hospital and walked into this room, and our surgeon was there, and he kind of gave us a post-op discussion. He examined her, and everything looked great. And then he introduced us to the other doctor in the room, who was an oncologist. And he explained to us that the biopsy indicated that the tumor she had was a grade 4 glioblastoma tumor, which, meant nothing to me at the time. And I'm the kind of person, I'm immediately thinking, okay, how do you spell that? Because as soon as we walk out of here, I'm Googling that and I'm going to learn everything I can. And it was as if the doctor could read my mind, because he said, now don't go home and Google glioblastoma, because you won't like what you read. It is a terminal condition, but it typically occurs in older adults, not in young teenage girls.
Hmm.
And with her being young and healthy otherwise, we're going to do radiation, we're going to do chemotherapy, and we're going to try to beat this thing. And so, that's what we walked out of there with, was, okay, we're going to tackle this thing, we're going to beat this thing, we're going to trust God with this. And that kind of put us on a year-long journey of radiation and chemotherapy. And Hannah did very well for 6 or 7 months. We would go in every 2 months and get an MRI, and every time it was all clear, no evidence of disease, which is exactly what you want to hear as a
Yeah.
parent with a child going through cancer. But and she started school her junior year of high school now, still working towards being the valedictorian and doing well in school.
She was probably going to make up for that time she
Oh yeah.
missed being
Oh
sick,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah. She was, anytime she was able, she was in school. So
Mm-hmm.
but she began that September, she began having some of the same symptoms she had at the beginning, the headaches, the morning nausea, and a little bit of balance issues that she had not had before. And so it had just been 6 weeks from her last MRI, which had been perfectly clear. But I called up to Children's and I said, there's just some things going on that are a little bit concerning. And they said, go ahead and bring her in and we'll scan her, and we'll just make sure everything's okay. And when they did that scan, the cancer had returned. It was on her brain stem now, and there were tumors all up and down her spine. And so, at this point, there's no surgery that you can do. They recommended a new regimen of chemotherapy and radiation, which we did. But it was a really harsh regimen, and she really never recovered from that point. She went to heaven on February 26th of 2009 at the age of 17. And I would like to tell you one other story about that year that just kind of tells you a little bit about who she was. When we went to the hospital the very first time, she knew she had a brain tumor. We didn't know it was cancer or anything like that. A couple of days before her surgery, I went home to get some rest. So she was at the hospital with her dad. And she told him a story. And she talked about how she had gone to a youth retreat called Disciple Now just a couple of months earlier with our church. And the speaker at that youth retreat talked to the kids about how God sometimes allows storms in our lives to bring us closer to Him and to allow others to see Him through our storms. And she said, Dad, I went to bed that night and I laid in bed and I thought about my life. This is a 16-year-old girl thinking about her life. And she said, I realized I had never been through a storm in my life. And she was right. Up to that point, our lives, we'd had a pretty charmed existence. She still had all of her grandparents living. No one in our family had ever had a serious illness or injury. And, she just said, I've never been through a storm. And so I prayed for a storm that God might use me. And, that was a comfort to us. We don't believe that God heard that prayer and answered it by giving her cancer. We do not believe that. But what we do know is that God is sovereign. God knew what was coming in her life, and He was preparing her so that when she got the news, just a couple of months after she prayed that prayer, that she had cancer, potentially terminal cancer, she accepted that news with grace and without fear. She said,
Mm.
"Oh, this is my storm that I prayed for," and
Wow.
that helped us as we walked that year, knowing that that God was in control, that this was not a surprise to Him, that she was in His hands, and that we could trust Him.
Yeah. Well, I admit I'm completely speechless. I knew what we were going to be talking about. And, in some way, I'm like, how do I prepare? How do
Yeah.
I prepare me to listen? How do I prepare our listeners to hear this? And I don't know that we can. I mean, it's just, I want to
Right.
hear your story. This isn't the first story that we've had on this podcast where there's loss. I spoke with one of my friends, Kim, who lost her daughter through a tragic accident, a drowning, and Peggy, whose daughter had a medical, just out of the blue, a heart thing, and her daughter was just so young, still elementary school.
Mm.
Um, and then Courtney, I'd like to talk about Courtney towards the
Mm-hmm.
end because the Lord's using her story to
Yes.
reach people and comfort them. And in the show notes, I will go through and link any other episodes that I have been about child loss. And so it happens, and we know that. And the situations may have all looked different. They all came from a different point. And your name and your ministry has come up in several of these conversations. And, I think as moms, we never know what's around the bend for
Right.
us or for a friend. And one of the reasons I really wanted you on here is because when we do have a diagnosis or a friend has a situation, we are going to Google and we're saying, I need resources. What is there available? How can I work through this for myself? Or how can I help my friend?
Right.
And so just being equipped, I know that there are moms listening who have been through this painful journey. And if they have not found your ministry, I'm hoping that they now can do that. And I know that there will be people in the future that
Mm.
are going to be walking down this road, or
Yes.
they have a friend who is going to be walking down this road. And as women, I just want to be equipped to minister to each other. And, like I haven't walked down that. I can't understand the feelings and, the wrestling in my mind and sorting it out. But I could point those friends to you and what you do because you can come alongside them. And so I'd love for you to tell me a little bit about the ministry that began. And I know it wasn't an overnight flip the switch, but your story has come into a ministry at this point.
Yes. Yes. With Hannah and her prayer for a storm, it's one of the things that's always just kind of stuck with us is that we don't want her storm to go to waste. We want good to come from it. And so we really kind of look at while we're waiting as something that came from her prayer for a storm.
Mhm.
One of the things that we discovered very quickly after Hannah went to heaven is the people that we were the most comfortable being around, the people that we most wanted to spend time with were other parents that had lost children. It was as if nobody else in our surroundings understood us anymore. It was almost as if we were on a whole different plane than the people around us. We had a gentleman come to a retreat one time and he said, it's as if everyone around me is talking about kindergarten and I want to talk about calculus. And that's how you feel after you've lost a child. It's everything in your world has got more of an eternal focus, and the small talk and the little things that we talk about here and just in our everyday lives just means nothing anymore because we just have a whole completely different focus. And so we began to kind of seek out other people that had lost children and spending time with them. And it was so, so helpful to us. And we ended up signing up and going to a retreat for parents that had lost children in Nashville, Tennessee. And it is hosted by Nancy Guthrie and her husband, David. Anyone who is listening that may have watched the Grief Share videos, you will recognize those names because they host those videos at that time. Well, and still, they host retreats for bereaved parents in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, for me to go to a retreat was a big stretch. I am a classic introvert. Going to retreats is not my thing. I don't even sign up for the women's retreats at our church. But when this idea or this concept came to me of attending a retreat for bereaved parents, I was like, oh, yes, this is something that we really need to do. And so we signed up and we went. And that was the most helpful thing we had done on our grief journey to that point. There were people there from 11 different states and Canada, and our stories were all very different. Like you said, every
Hmm.
bereaved parent story is different, from the age of your child to the circumstances that took them home. But it didn't matter because the pain of losing a child is the same, whatever their age or whatever the circumstance. And so we really bonded with those parents, and we still keep in touch with a lot of them today. And that was about 12 years ago. But we came home from that retreat with what we believe was the God given desire to replicate that type of ministry here where we live in Arkansas. And we talked to a lot of people about it. We prayed about it. We shared the idea with other parents that had lost children, but we really didn't have any kind of catalyst to move us forward. It's hard to start a ministry kind of from nothing.
Hmm.
Um, and then there was another couple in our church whose son was a Navy SEAL, and he was killed in action in Afghanistan in March of 2010. His name was Adam Brown. And we really didn't know this other couple. Their names are Larry and Janice Brown. We always just kind of joke about the fact they're a little bit older than we are. They're old enough to be our parents. And so, we kind of had different circles of friends. We went to the same church, but we really had not ever had a chance to get to know them. But after Adam was killed, it was another bereaved couple. And so we would encounter them at church, and our eyes would just meet and this understanding would pass between us without us even speaking a word. And one Sunday we invited them to go to lunch with us, and they did. And we sat down over lunch, and we were sitting in this restaurant, this little booth, for 3.5 hours. Even though our stories were so very different, we had so much in common because the loss of a child just binds you together like that. And we shared with them about this idea we had about starting a retreat ministry for bereaved parents in Arkansas. And these folks who were really meeting us for the very first time looked at us across the table and said, well, let's do it. And it was that
Mm.
quickly that the
Wow.
ministry was born. We started brainstorming about where we could do it and when. And we hosted our first retreat in April of 2011 at a borrowed facility. We used a church camp on the outskirts of town. And what we did was we just brought a group of bereaved parents together. That first retreat, they were all couples. And we spent the weekend together sharing our children's stories with one another, praying for each other, encouraging each other, talking about things that only other child lost parents truly understand. And we had a wonderful retreat with those folks. And so it was just confirmation from God that we were moving in the right direction. And for 5 years, we did retreats just twice a year using this borrowed facility. We got a website during that time. We started, got our nonprofit certification and all of these things. And as word of mouth spread and the website and Facebook presence and all of that, the demand for these retreats began to grow to the point where two a year wasn't enough. And so we started doing them. We used other borrowed facilities, anywhere that would host us, we would try to have a retreat. But over time, we began to see the need for our own facility. And through a series of events that only God could have orchestrated, we were able to build a retreat facility. Larry and Janice Brown actually owned this little house out in the country that they had lived in for a period of time, and they had moved from it years ago, but they had never sold it. They've always just kind of held on to it and let different people live in it. Missionaries that were on furlough needed a place to live, young pastors' families just starting out, and the house had kind of fallen into a little bit of disrepair, but it's sitting on a beautiful piece of property with a pond and rolling hills and beautiful trees. And we came out here one evening and just kind of walked through the house. It was just a 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch house. And we were like, is
Mhm.
there any possible way that this house could be transformed into a retreat center? And
Mm.
we committed to praying for it, about that. And I just have to tell this story. When I got home that evening, I checked my email. We had had a website for quite a bit of time by that point, and it had a donate button on the website. It had never been used ever. And during that hour or so that we were out here walking around this house, we had 2 donations come in for a total of $900. Like I said, we had never had a donation on the website before. Nobody knew we were thinking of building. Nobody knew we were looking at this property. So it was just confirmation from God that we were on the right track. I didn't mention when I talked about our retreats, we do not charge for our retreats. We were advised to charge, and we so people would have some ownership, have some skin in the game. And so we charged for the very first retreat, but before it was over, we just felt prompted to give them their money back. And we did that before they left. We gave everybody their money back. And so we had never charged since then. So we didn't have any kind of income stream. But again, like I said, through just a series of miraculous events, within about a year and a half, we had a complete 12-bedroom retreat center built on this property for less than $500,000, completely debt free.
Wow.
An architect had come out and given us an estimate, and he estimated $1 million to build what we wanted to build. So you can see God just provided in an incredible way.
Yeah.
And we had our first retreat at this location in October of 2016. So we have just finished 6 years of hosting retreats here. Again, with just this retreat location in Arkansas, the demand began to grow to the point that we thought, well, we need to be able to offer more even than what we can have here. And, God sent people, parents who came to our retreats, who before they even came had felt a calling from God to do some sort of retreat type ministry. The first couple who did that came from Oregon. And when they said, well, what would you think if we recreated this ministry or took this concept and hosted a while we're waiting weekend in Oregon? And I have to be honest, at first we were like, well, I don't know about that. I don't know. But, after we prayed about it, it was like, this is not our ministry. This is God's ministry. And so we opened a satellite location in Oregon. We just rent a venue there. This is the only venue as of right now we plan to ever build. And then we had a couple came from Maryland that also felt called to host retreats. And so they began hosting retreats in Maryland. And now we're actually hosting retreats in 16 states. And we host retreats. Last year, I was counting up just for our end of the year 2022 letter, we hosted 57 bereaved parent retreats in 2022. And when I looked at that, I thought, well, that's not even possible because there's only 52 weekends in a year. But very often we have 3 or 4 retreats happening at the same time. And God has provided wonderful facilitators to host those retreats. And parents who come to a retreat, they have the opportunity to share their child's story with the group. And that's a lot of what we do. It's very relaxed. It's not a seminar. Nobody's standing up
Mhm.
in front and like teaching you anything. It's not a
Note
grief
taking.
conference.
Yeah.
There's no breakout sessions. It's not a formal thing at all. It's just a very relational, sit around in a comfortable living room type setting, talk about our kids, talk about things we deal with as bereaved parents, all of those things I mentioned that are like
Hmm.
calculus that everybody else is
Yeah.
talking about kindergarten. We spend some time in praise and worship on Sunday morning, and then do like a closing that just kind of gives people some tools that they can bring
Mhm.
home with them after they've spent the weekend together like this. There are a lot of grief ministries and grief groups that you can go to that will tell you how to grieve. we here at While We're Waiting, we want to tell you, not tell you, we want to show you how you can live with grief. Does that make
Mm,
sense? We don't want to
mm-hmm,
just show you how to grieve. We want to show you how to live while you
mm-hmm,
grieve. Because so often after the loss of a child, it just feels like life is over. It feels like
mm-hmm,
there is no more purpose in life.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And we believe that we can live while we grieve. And the only way we can really do that is through that personal relationship with Jesus Christ and leaning on Him.
mm-hmm,
Our retreats are open to people from all different faith backgrounds, even no faith background at all. It does not matter, but it is woven throughout all of our events that we have at the weekend. The gospel is woven throughout, both implicitly and explicitly. And people know that when you go to our website, it's very clear that it's a faith-based retreat.
mm-hmm,
But like I said, we welcome people from all different backgrounds, different denominations. It doesn't matter, but we do talk about hope and the
mm-hmm,
hope that we have and
mm-hmm.
the joy that we have as we look forward to being reunited with our children.
Well, I want to clarify a little
Yeah.
bit of verbiage. When you were saying kindergarten versus calculus,
Uh-huh.
it's not that the kindergarten isn't important. It's
Exactly.
just
Sure.
that your focus right now needs to be the calculus.
Yes.
And I went to a writing retreat, and one of the people talking, he said, people say you're not broad enough, you're not including everybody. He said, but I talk to men who want to engage with their family and be intentional and raise their family for the Lord, and that's my focus group.
Yeah.
And if people, get offended that I'm not speaking to the single guy, or that, I'm trying to show how to cultivate a godly marriage and parenting. And if I say I'm going to be so broad, I want to include everybody, then I cannot minister in the same way to that small group that needs
Right.
ministering to. So
Mhm.
you're not saying, and we never say that, your trauma is less important, or,
Right.
what you're going through, like we only want to focus on this. It's just that what you're going through is so unique, and the shared bonds, all of that, it really requires some focus to
Mhm.
to help each other.
Yes. Yeah, and we have parents, and we're limited just to bereaved parents, but we can have at one retreat, we could have somebody who had a stillborn baby. We can have somebody who lost a toddler to cancer, like Courtney. We can have someone who lost a child in a car accident. We can have somebody whose child died by suicide. We can have somebody whose child died from a fentanyl overdose. We can have somebody whose child died in a drowning. We have all different types of loss. And like I said, it really doesn't matter because the
Mhm.
pain is the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah. And there may be some other supportive ministries that go along with some of those individual
Yes.
instances. I wonder how much your ministry overlaps with some of those. I actually also interviewed, and it's already aired, a gal who lost her husband
Hmm.
through medical lost her
Yeah.
husband. And I said, I don't know what the connection is, but you should get a hold of While We're Waiting. And this was one question I had for you is, are you connected with other groups, or could you direct people to places they could go, ministries for loss of husband, or a child who's lost their parent, or even is there any place that supports children who've lost a sibling?
Yeah. Well, that's such a need. Children who've lost a sibling is close to my heart because of what my own daughter went through when she lost her sister. I'm not familiar with a lot of other ministries that do those things.
Okay.
Grief Share is a great ministry that addresses all types of grief.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a great ministry for someone who's lost
Any
anyone,
loss.
really.
Yeah.
Yes, any type of loss, a good biblically based grief support. I do know of a ministry here in Arkansas for women who have lost a husband, and that is called When We Becomes Me. And you can find them at whenwebecomes.me.com. And they host retreats. We actually allow them to use our retreat facility. That's how I know them so well.
Right.
A few times a year. And they do a retreat for women that have lost their spouse. Lots of the folks that attend Grief Share are widows and widowers. So, that's always a great place to go. Yeah, I wish
Okay.
there was more available for siblings. And I think there are some things, and that is something that, we've kind of looked into a couple of times because all the parents who come, one of the topics that they always want to talk about are their surviving children. And because they
Yeah.
all struggle. And we've kind of looked into that. And whenever we start moving that direction, it's almost like God says, that stay in your lane is parents. And we do feel like by helping the parents, that equips them better to help their own children. So,
Right. Yeah.
mhm.
This would be a beautiful segue to tell everybody about our friend Courtney's little
Yes,
project.
of course, please
And
do.
yeah, so Courtney Mount has been a guest here before. I'm, of course, linking the episode in the show notes. But even just this week, Courtney has a launch team going for her book that she's written. And it is specifically a picture book for children who've lost a sibling. And not only that, she said when her daughter had this cancer diagnosis, she was wanting to explain to her daughter at 2 years old, what's happening to you? What does this look like? And so she wanted a book to really explain the healing that happens in heaven, your
Yes,
heavenly healing.
yes,
And so I would love it if I'm going to link that book in the
yes,
show notes as well. And we would love to find your support for Courtney in sharing the book. Buy a copy and keep it in your little library because you don't know when a friend might need it. And, I even think about that our children's friendships. There's ways that we can support each other as women, but even our children supporting other children,
yes,
the whole topic is huge. I would say that if in the last 10 minutes, we might have just planted a seed for somebody else to start a ministry because
yes,
we know that we need more people pouring in to these needs.
yes, yes. Well, and I wanted to say too, since your podcast is targeted primarily at women, that we have at our retreats, we do have, it's a mixture of couples and singles. It is open to both couples and singles. And we almost always have several single moms who come in and join with our couples. And it works out really well that way. We also host one day, we call them mini retreats that are just for moms. And they're smaller, a little bit more intimate. They're just one day rather than spread out over the weekend. I almost hate to bring that up because the waiting lists for those are so long, but you can see those on our website as well. But I want moms to know that they are welcome to come to any of our retreats. And you mentioned, one area that we have kind of done a specialized retreat for, and that is for suicide support. We've had so many parents come who have lost children to suicide, and we have them in our mixed groups, and they do fine. But we know there's difference there. They carry an extra weight, an extra burden that's often put on them by society that makes suicide loss a little bit different. And so we do host retreats that are specifically for parents that have lost children to suicide. I believe your friend went to one of those. And,
Right.
those are, again, becoming available all over the country as well.
So I have talked to, like I said, several ladies who have been to some of your retreats. And incidentally, I don't know that I mentioned to you, we've lived in Oregon for 22 years, and it's
Really?
only been recently that we moved to Tennessee. And
Wow.
so, when I heard about your ministry, I'm pretty sure it was from my friend in Oregon who had
Sure.
lost her daughter.
Yep.
And that makes perfect sense now when you mentioned Oregon.
Uh-huh.
Knowing this interview was coming up, one of my friends just sent me a little bit of her testimony about what your ministry has meant to her. She said a couple or a single person might be questioning if attending a retreat will really help them or will it hurt.
Yeah.
And she said the answer is yes. There is likely going to be hurt felt in the grieving process at a retreat. But I would add that the help far outweighs the hurt. She said, "We were on a waiting list to attend a while we were waiting retreat and expected for it to be months before we could attend when an opening became available. I was at a place of feeling very ready for something to help me. An opening came during an especially hard week for me, and I was feeling like I really needed something to help move me forward. I was stuck. It turned out that it was exactly what I needed, the best thing so far in my grieving." That speaks. That's what it's about.
Yes. Yes. That's a blessing to hear.
So, as we wrap up, I've even learned right before we hit record that you also have a podcast. And I would love for you to share with me a little bit about the podcast and then where people can find you. I will be linking all of those areas in the show notes. So it's just a click away. But tell us where we
Sure.
can connect.
Yeah, the podcast is called While We're Waiting, Hope After Child Loss. And I began recording episodes during COVID when all of our retreats were shut down. So we've got a lot of episodes that people can listen to. A few of them are what I call solo episodes. They're just me talking, but for the most part, they are interviews. And I interview people who have lost children, again, all the way from stillborn babies to suicide situations to murder to car accidents to just about everything. So there's something there that everyone can relate to. And it's just been a real blessing to me to do that. So while we're waiting, Hope After Child Loss, you can find out on all of your podcast apps. We have a website, www.whilewe'rewaiting.org, and that's where you can get information and register for all of our different retreats. We have a public While We're Waiting page, Facebook page that anyone can follow, and it's just called While We're Waiting. We have a private Facebook group that is just for parents that have lost children, and it's called While We're Waiting Support After Child Loss. And in order to be in that group, you have to request to join. There are some screening questions, and then you can be a part of that group. And there are over 8,000 people in that group, and we're all bereaved parents. And it is the most, this may be hard to believe, but it is the most positive and encouraging group of people you can imagine. Somebody can post on there in the middle of the night and say, "I'm really struggling tonight. Would you pray for me?" And there might be 100 people comment and pray for that person. And we just encourage each other and love each other in that group. So if you have experienced the loss of a child, I encourage you to look up our Facebook group, While We're Waiting, Support for Bereaved Parents. We do have a Facebook group that's for siblings as well, and it's called While We're Waiting, Support for Bereaved Siblings. And my daughter is one of the moderators of that group. It's a much quieter page. We find that siblings don't talk nearly as much as their parents do. But that's another resource you can point your children to if they are looking to get connected with other bereaved siblings.
Thank you so much. This is the information that we pray we never have to use,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
But I'm so thankful that the Lord stirred in your heart to to be the founder of this
Yes.
ministry,
Yes.
so that you can help comfort other people with the comfort that you've been given.
Exactly.
So I want to ask if you would just close us out today in prayer.
I would be glad to. Lord, I thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to Pam today and just share the story that really is your story, that you've walked us through, our family. And Lord, I know that there are probably moms listening who have also experienced the loss of a child. I know that I had no idea how common it was until I became a bereaved mom myself. And Lord, I just pray for that mom who might be listening that's hurting today, that's grieving, that's missing their child, that's living a life that they never thought they would be living. Lord, I just pray that you would surround her with your love, that you would encourage her, that you would give her hope for this journey. Remind her that grief doesn't last forever, that one day we will see our children again and that we will be reunited with them. And Lord, we have much to look forward to. The best is yet to come, but the days can seem very long while we're waiting for that day. I just pray that you would bless Pam, bless her ministry that she has, the moms that she ministers to and reaches out to. Lord, I just pray that, Lord, through our conversation and through our respective ministries, Lord, that people would be pointed to you, that people would maybe begin to seek you for the first time. Then they would come to know you as their Savior. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right. We'll see you next week, ladies. Bye-bye.
I hope that you've been encouraged or challenged in your faith today, and that something we discussed prompts you to grow deeper in your walk with the Lord. If it has, make sure you tell a friend so they can grow along with you. And if you or a friend would like to be a guest and share about God's faithfulness in your life, please email me at podcast@tendingfields.net. Because when we tell of God's faithfulness, we never run out of stories.
Whatever is true.